Student demonstrators turned violent as they stormed Britain's ruling party building, protesting government cuts to education. Is university education in the UK becoming a luxury no longer affordable to all? And is it about time the subsidised system is reviewed? This is Inside Story. Welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abu Gaida. Well, fighting for affordable higher education. On Wednesday, around 50,000 people demonstrated on the streets of London. They were protesting against the government's plans to raise the cap on tuition fees and oppose cuts on university teaching budgets in England. While the government says it will be a fair deal, many fear it'll make higher education too expensive. Well, the largely peaceful demonstration turned ugly when a small group of people began smashing up the headquarters of the governing Conservative Party. 50 people were arrested, but they've been released since then, pending further inquiries. The protests are intended to put pressure on the government before the new legislation is presented to Parliament. Joining us now to discuss this issue, all in London, are guests. Firstly, Sam Bowman. He's the head of research at the think tank, the Adam Smith Institute. Also with us, Chris Cook, the education correspondent for the Financial Times. And we have Osman Ali. He's the vice president of higher education at the National Union of Students. That's one of the unions that organised the demonstration. Chris Cook, if I may start with you, police in the UK admitted to being caught out by the scale of student action. Did you expect this type of reaction on the streets of London?
No, I don't think any of us did. I think we should be clear. There are two things that happened that are slightly different during the protests. There was, first of all, a much larger number of students than had been expected. And to be fair to the National Union of Students, they did keep updating the police with how many people they expected to turn up. And there's a separate issue, which is that there were several hundred people. We're not clear how many of them are actually students who turned out to have well, what they think is a good time. When our reporters on the streets went out to the protests and to the riots, we found that the National Union of Students marshals were very assiduous in telling people to stay away from the violence. So we think we have to be clear. There's a protest that was bigger than expected, but basically peaceful, and which the National Union of Students was quite careful to make sure stayed peaceful. And
all right,
okay,
let me bring in Osman Ali then. The National Union of Students did try to distance itself from those people that did turn violent. Have the students, in your opinion, lost public sympathy, Osman, because of the violence that we saw on the streets of London?
I think in some ways, yes, we have. The fact that we're discussing the issue today of the mindless violent actions which took place at the national demonstration has taken away the bigger picture about cuts to education, the tripling of fees, the getting rid of the education maintenance allowance. Rather than discussing the bigger picture, what we should be discussing, rather than discussing that 50,000 students were on the streets of London, at a peaceful protest, we're discussing the actions which that small majority put forward. So obviously it has tarnished the picture of the bigger picture of the national demonstration. We did everything by the book. We worked with the police throughout the whole process to ensure that we had a peaceful protest. But the students who were there, not just the students but wider community at large as well, did have a fun day, did take the issues to the streets. We had members of Parliament joining us along the march as well.
All right. Well, we will talk about the issues clearly throughout this program. But Sam Bowman, let me ask you: the Metropolitan Police Commissioner says that the events are an embarrassment to London. How embarrassing is it to London, in your opinion?
I think they're really an embarrassment to the National Union of Students. The NUS has emphasised that the rioters at Millbank were a small fraction of the march, and it was about 1 in 50 students who were at the march were at the riot. And it's important to remember that the marchers themselves are a very, very small fraction of students nationally. The marchers account for 50,000 out of 2.5 million students nationally, and which is also 1 in 50. So if the NUS is prepared to claim that the rioters don't represent them, then they have to admit that their march doesn't represent the 2.5 million students in the UK, the vast majority of whom did not attend that march and do not support the NUS in their campaign.
OK, well, let's just give our viewers some background information. Now, this is all part of UK's austerity measures, and it's expected to kick in by 2012, those education cuts that we're talking about. Now, the British Parliament is expected to vote on the issue before the end of this year. And if passed, the current tuition fee cap of $5,000 will be substantially raised. Universities in England will be able to charge up to $10,000 a year, and in exceptional cases, up to $15,000 a year. Well, the government will continue to provide students with education loans. The threshold at which graduates have to start paying back their loans back is currently $25,000. Now, that figure will be raised to $34,000. And the current flat interest rate of 1.5% will be changed to a progressive one, anywhere between 0 and 3%, depending on the income. If the debt is not cleared 30 years after graduation, it will be wiped out. So what does all this mean? Well, in a nutshell, a student doing a 3-year course will leave university with a 30-year debt of anywhere between $50,000 to $60,000. Sam Bowman, if I may come back to you, what's your reaction to the planned university cuts?
Well, we think they're a step in the right direction. The key is to make students bear the burden of their education, not the general public. The current situation where the government pays for the majority of the students' education means that people who haven't gone to university, bus drivers, bin men, people on low income, are ending up subsidising people to go to university who will end up earning a lot more. And we think that's unfair. And I think that the new system needs to be one where the person who pays for their education is the person who gets the benefit of that, and that is the graduate.
Osman, do you think that the cuts in spending are all about changing the education system, or is this another case of the government in the UK just looking for cuts because of the austerity measures?
I think it's changing the higher education system really negatively. The fact that we have inequalities in education already, this will cause inequalities in education a lot more. Students will pick courses on the ability to pay rather than the ability to learn. Institutions which are supposed to be ranked very highly are just on historic prestige and just the image that they have because they've been around for a lot longer. The example I can give, that if you look at Oxford Brookes, which is just down the road from Oxford University, in terms of teaching quality, it's ranked highly for courses like French and history, but students will only pick Oxford because of its name, not because of the added value or the student experience that they'll get out of it, but just because they can afford to go there. The fact that the London Met, one institution alone, has more students from widening participation backgrounds than the top 20 Russell Group institutions shows how ridiculous inequalities in education is already. And if this is put into practice, it will affect students from the lower middle class a lot more, and psychologically affect students from widening participation backgrounds a heck of a lot more.
Chris, some critics of this say that the government must look into the idea of taxing big businesses and using that money to expand rather than reduce the opportunity to study. What do you say to that?
Well, so you mean taking money out of general taxation, taxing the wider public and businesses and people more to pay for universities. That's a view. I mean, it's a system that the NUS, I think, would prefer.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. Were changes to tuition fees and higher education funding needed in the UK?
Well, the government has put through a programme of cuts of £83 billion over the next few years to close Britain's enormous budget deficit. There are arguments to be had about whether they are cutting too quickly or too slowly. There are arguments to be had about where the distribution of cuts should fall. But it's almost inconceivable that we could have had a situation where universities, which are public sector cash dependent, they're not part of the public sector themselves, but they are dependent on public money, could have expected to be reprieved while we're squeezing hospitals and schools and squeezing the poor and pensioners. It's just not conceivable that the universities could have expected not to take part in, not to dip their hands in this blood. But at the same time, and if you cut the amount of money that the government spends centrally on universities, that means either you have to have far fewer students, or you have to spend a lot less on courses, or you have to raise fees. And there's no political will to cut the number of students, and it would be economically peculiar decision. There's no will to cut the quality of courses, and I think any government that tried to say we're going to make economies on the quality of teaching on our universities would take a pounding for it. So the option is raise fees.
All right. Well, Osman, supporters of the measures claim that change was needed, and we just heard Chris also advocating for that. What do you make of such ideas? Was British education on the line? Were these changes needed to the education system?
What was needed was a fairer alternative, and fairer alternatives were put forward towards the Lord Browne review. The fact that there were alternatives like the graduate tax model, which NUS put forward, there were fairer alternatives which sector people put forward as well. And in the meeting with the Lord Browne, he actually recognised that the model which was put forward by NUS was very progressive and benefited higher education overall. What students should be doing is paying towards any financial gain that they get out of higher education. And this is the proposal that we put forward. So students would leave, there'd be no upfront fees, students would leave university and pay back based on how higher education has benefited them financially. So this doesn't allow students to pay back, so this doesn't allow students to pick courses just on the ability to pay afterwards, but allows students to still go into courses which they enjoy, go into courses which then afterwards which will lead into voluntary work as well, not just into the jobs which will pay them the most. And this our model actually shows that over 20 years' time that there'll be £6 billion invested every year back into higher education. And if that's not progressive, and if that doesn't deal with money issues, then the model which put forward by the coalition government at the moment it has progressive elements, but it's progressive elements within a regressive system. So it's really going to hit students from different backgrounds the hardest. Psychologically, knowing that you're going to leave university with £40,000 worth of debt is enough to put anybody off. I come from a widening participation background myself, and I speak to potential students on a regular basis. The average student already leaves with £25,000 worth of debt, and that puts off huge amounts of students entering into higher education. And the fact that the education maintenance allowance is going to be scrapped as well is just ridiculous, because that's going to stop students entering into colleges from poorer backgrounds, which then in return will mean that there's a lot less going into higher education. Okay,
Sam, do you agree with what Osman is saying, that this is going to affect students from poorer backgrounds? And also, let me just play a devil's advocate here and ask you, why should students in England pay more for an education if they're going to get less funding and less resources?
Well, just to go back to Osman's point about people from disadvantaged backgrounds, they're still going to get all of their fees paid up front by the government. No student is going to be prevented from going to university because of an ability to pay. And in fact, what this new mechanism does is makes more money available for students from disadvantaged backgrounds to go into university. And it frees more money to encourage people from bad backgrounds to come into university so that they can study and improve their education. But another thing he said about was that students shouldn't be forced to choose on the basis of a degree to pay, that they should be able to choose something that's fun. And I think that that just is incredible at a time like this, when the people are losing their jobs, that the NUS could say that they should be able to choose degrees, I should say, based on how fun they are. The rest of us shouldn't have to subsidise other people's fun. We shouldn't have to, those of us who haven't gone to university, or those of us who work low-income jobs, shouldn't have to subsidise people to have fun at university. If they want to have fun, let them do it, but let them pay for themselves. The new system will prevent anybody from having to pay up front. They'll be able to pay it throughout their lives once they're earning money, but it will allow people to choose degrees, not like Mickey Mouse degrees, like, for example, Wayne Rooney studies, David Beckham studies, which will be a thing of the past. It's true. People will be forced to study degrees which are useful to their jobs, useful to their lives, useful to the society, and we need these changes now, because without that, we're going to be throwing money down the hole, and it's going to be...
Osman, go ahead.
Yeah, so Sam, we're talking about Mickey Mouse subjects like the full public funding being cut for arts, social sciences and humanities, subjects like history, subjects like media, the fact that I'm speaking to you through a media channel and something that media is part of all our lives. It makes sense to actually study these subjects, and the fact that public funding for all these courses are going to be cut is just ridiculous. These courses have benefited everybody, and I'm not talking about university being fun. I went to university, I studied business, I studied business.
A history degree.
Okay, let me finish. I studied business, and I'm here doing student politics.
You interrupted me.
If we can just let Osman get his thought across, and then I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Osman, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry Sam, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what I'm trying to say was that I study business information systems. I'm here now doing student politics. The fact that the experiences that I had on campus, getting involved in student union, having the ability to get involved in societies, chairing meetings, networking skills, it was the wider student experience, which David Willits talks about so much as well, is why I'm in this position today. Fair enough, I went for that degree, but the funding for that degree is now going to be cut as well, because it falls under the band C and D. But the fact that I had access to higher education, I gained a lot more from the people I met, met, from the opportunities that were open to me, and the added value that I actually got from going to the University of Salford.
All right, Sam?
I'm sure you had a good time at university. I had a good time at university as well. I didn't choose a businessy subject, I chose an art subject. But if I want to do an art subject, if I enjoy that, that should be something that I have to pay for. If somebody wants to choose a degree like media studies, like history, like economics, all very valuable, all very useful degrees in their own right, but useful to the person who studies them, not necessarily to the economy. People should be forced to pay for their own degrees because everybody benefits from their own degree. The person who benefits most from a history degree is the holder of that degree. People are willing to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on a house, tens of thousands of pounds on cars, tens of thousands of pounds on weddings. It's only fair that people should be able to pay the full price for the most valuable thing in their life, which is a university degree.
Okay, well,
otherwise,
gentlemen,
we're going to see money being thank you.
Let me just bring in an important point here. And according to the University and College Union, one of the UK's largest trade and professional associations, even at a price tag of $8,000, which is below the new proposed cap, degrees in England would in fact be the world's most expensive. Now, this concurs with the findings of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or what's known as the OECD. 6 out of the 22 developed countries it analyzed did not charge any fees at all. Currently, only Iceland, America and Norway charge more than England. Locally, within the UK, students at Scottish universities do not pay any fees at all, and the government gives the universities there about $3,000 a year per student. Over in Wales, tuition fee caps is the same as England, and students there are given a grant of about $3,000 towards their fees. Chris, if I can come back to you, how concerned are you that the planned spending cuts will threaten Britain's standing in the international world?
Well, Britain is very lucky in that it has three really serious world-class universities, Oxford, Cambridge and UCL, which are full spectrum world-class universities from arts to sciences. And they are of enormous importance to stimulating, they and other universities too, but they are particularly peculiar, big institutions. It's very important for the UK that they continue to thrive and they continue to do well. But those institutions have been supported to date, not really by tuition fees, but actually by research funding. Private and public, and the research budget's only being cut by 9% over the next 4 years, which is an extremely delicate cut by the standard of what's going on in the British state. So actually, the really heavyweight research base, which is something that's of enormous interest to our readers in particular, which drives the innovation in East Anglia around Cambridge and in the South Midlands around Oxford and London around UCL, but also in other little centres too, is of enormous importance, and there's no reason to think that's going anywhere. Furthermore, now that we're actually incentivising universities to really take care of their students because we're making those students pay for their degrees, we should actually expect some of these institutions, which have been historically good at research but not very good at teaching, to raise their game on teaching too. So I don't think there's any reason particularly to worry about the UK standing in the world.
Osman, let me just bring you in here and ask you, politically, Nick Clegg is blaming, in fact, the decision to charge students on the poor state that the Labour Party had left the public finances in. So do you agree with that?
There were many mistakes made by the previous government. One of them especially being the fact that the Lord Brown Review and who they put on the panel, and naturally the people they put on the panel was going to be very biased. But Nick Clegg ran on a pledge and he promised that he will vote against any fees and look for a fair alternative. And these fair alternatives were put forward. The fact that the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which came out yesterday, have done some groundbreaking research and show that the figures show that the model which is put forward by the coalition government is actually less progressive and will benefit richer students more compared to other students, compared to the model which Lord Brown came out with. So every promise Nick Clegg has come out with, he's actually broken.
All right, Sam, some critics say that the government is trying to recover the $1.2 trillion bailout to the banks from society. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure that's really the question. My own views on the bank bailouts aside, I think what we need to look at is the deficit and the fact that the UK has one of the largest deficits in the world. And unless we make these cuts, which might be painful for some people, I don't think the university cuts are going to be very painful. In fact, I think it's quite a good step.
But is it fair to let the students pay for the? Is it fair to let the students pay for the faults of the or the mistakes of the financial sector?
It's probably not fair that anybody has to pay for the mistakes of the financial sector, to be honest. But that was a step taken by the previous government, and the current government is in that position that they can't change it. And now we have to decide what we do next. And the key thing is now that we make people pay for themselves, pay their own way. It's unfortunate that Nick Clegg made that pledge when he was in opposition. I think he probably didn't expect that he'd ever be in a position to implement the pledge. So I think that's why he made it. But now we have to look at the real world. And it's fine for the National Union of Students to talk about students and to say they want more money. Of course, students want more money. But we have to look at society in general. We have to look at where can society make cuts, where can't society make cuts. And I think that it's clear from the Brown Review that the first thing we need to change is to make students pay for themselves in their own education. And I think that's something that almost everybody can agree on.
Osman Ali, what will the National Union of Students do next? Is this unrest that we saw in London just a one-off, or is this sort of a prelude to more events to come?
Just to say as well, in responding to Sam, is that we're not asking for more money. What we're looking for is fair alternatives. The fact that we're the only country, alongside Romania, that is cutting into higher education, when similar countries like France, USA, countries across Europe, which are in similar economic situations than us, are actually investing more in higher education because they understand the impacts that highly skilled graduates have once they leave university and how it benefits society. And we're the only country which is cutting higher education as a whole. Shows how wrong we actually are. In terms of going forward, we will put as much pressure on all of MPs, especially the Liberal Democrat MPs who promised the pledge. Every single Lib Dem MP who was in their seat today was backed by students, and students in their constituencies will hold them to the pledge, ensure that they stick to the pledge, and anybody who does not stick to their pledge, I believe that Nick Clegg has broken so many of his promises that we actually need to give him a hand. And one of the things he ran on was this thing called the right to recall, and we will make sure that this right to recall is put into practice against every single Liberal Democrat MP who breaks the promise that they actually stood for.
Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just reply.
Yes, because I see you nodding there. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're living in a fantasy land if you think more people now support you than did a week ago. Now more people in the country who aren't students can see that the students who marched are a special interest group, and they're trying to enrich themselves at the cost of society. Everybody can see that now. The riots made that very, very clear. They aren't interested in general society.
There were 50,000 students there, Sam. 50,000 students. The biggest national demonstration the student movement has ever seen.
2.5 million. That was 50,000 out of 2.5 million, which is the same proportion, which is the same proportion as, if you'll just let me finish, which is the same proportion as there were rioters out of the marchers. The marchers are not representative of students, and I thank God that they're not, because the marchers are a very, very self-interested minority who are trying to get something for nothing. They're trying to get a free education on the backs of people who haven't gone to university. That isn't fair.
They weren't there for a free education. They were there for a fair alternative. Majority of 50,000 students which were there were looking for a fair alternative, and the 200 people which were actually inside Millerbank out of the 50,000 is actually less than 1%. It doesn't represent 1 in 50. It's less than 1% of the people who were there with a serious message for a peaceful protest, but to highlight the issues. And that's why we were joined by MPs on the day. That's why Boris Johnson himself said it was a peaceful protest, and the protest he saw was completely different to the one that media has portrayed. All
right, gentlemen. I'm sorry, but we've run out of time here on Inside Story. But thank you very much for that very delightful discussion. Sam Bowman, Chris Cook, and Osman Ali, of course, all guests from London on this episode. And our viewers, we thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and your suggestions. As always, you can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.